Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickens here. Thank you all for watching. So in this video what I'd like to do is take some time to talk about Eric Olson's 1997 essay, Was I Ever a Fetus? Now those of you who've read the Olson, those of you who know your Olson, you know he answers this question by saying, yes, I was once a fetus, you were once a fetus. Generally speaking, we were all once fetuses. He takes this to really be a fact of experience. Perhaps we can call it a datum that we would start with in our reasoning and our theorizing. The big picture question that Olson is trying to answer in his piece is, what are we? And so he asks this question, was I ever a fetus, to guide him in answering the question of what we are. And when he asks the question, what are we? He wants to know what we are in terms of our essence, in terms of our nature. And he wants to ask this question as neutrally as possible. So think about how neutral the question, what are we, is. He wants to know what the we is, what the we means. And if we were to take a couple examples, it may be helpful to see how the question of what are we is very general. It doesn't beg any questions, or at least doesn't seem to. So suppose we were to begin with the question, what is human nature? And we used answering that question to answer the question, what are we? It looks like in that case we'd be presupposing that we're human beings, or that we have a human nature. Now, that might seem intuitive that we're human beings. It might seem like that's a datum as well, but it's still presupposing something that would, at least at the outset, perhaps taint our theorizing. Likewise, if we're to begin by saying, what is personal identity? And that's our guiding question to answering the question of what are we? That would beg the question in favor of us being persons, essentially. So Olson doesn't want to assume from the outset that we're human beings or that we're persons. He wants to allow his reasoning and his theorizing to drive us toward an answer to the question of what we are. So the big picture question again, what are we? We begin there, so we're not begging any questions at the outset regarding what we are, essentially. Human beings on the one hand, persons on the other. Okay, and there also might be issues with ambiguities if you think about it. Human being and person, those terms might mean different things, and so at the outset we might have to do some defining. If we just begin with the very general notion, intuitive idea of us or we, we're not begging any questions, and hopefully we're not beginning with any ambiguous starting points. Okay, so let's think about the question, what are we? What makes us identical to ourselves? Sometimes the way of thinking about it. Philosophers, when they try to figure out what we are, they try different methods, as you can imagine. One of the methods that's prominent in Olson's 1997 piece and in many works of philosophy, both prior to and after Olson, involves thinking about the idea of persistence conditions, having persistence conditions. So we want to know what we are. One way we can get at what we are is to think about what conditions have to be satisfied in order for us to continue to exist over time. So there's this notion of persistence conditions. Let me see if I can make persistence conditions, that expression clearer, because it's really, really crucial for understanding the Olson. I've already given you a sense of what it is, but I wanted to slow down a little bit and capture what is going on when philosophers use this locution, persistence conditions. So to persist, let's just define the term, just means to exist over time, okay, to exist across time, okay? And typically we talk about things persisting or things existing across time, despite the fact that it undergoes change, right, during those times. So Easy example, I existed 10 minutes ago, so did you. I existed 10 minutes ago. That seems to be a fact of experience. I've undergone some changes in the last 10 minutes, but yet I remain the same, okay? There's a sense in which I remain the same despite the fact that I've undergone change. So one change is that I am now, creating a video. 10 minutes ago I hadn't been in the business of creating a video. Maybe I had been organizing some of my thoughts and what I'm going to say in the video, but I hadn't created a video yet. I'm a bit older now than I was 10 minutes ago, etc., etc. Yet I remain the same. So this idea of persistence is an everyday idea. We think that we continue to exist across time despite the fact that we undergo change. We think the very same thing's true for other things, of course. Olson's interested in us in his 97 piece, but you can imagine philosophers being interested in how it is that tables and chairs or trees or pets and the like, how they continue to exist over time. In doing so, they're taking interest in the persistence of those objects. Okay. Those other kinds of objects. Now, we have the idea of persistence, now the idea of conditions. That's pretty straightforward. Here we're thinking about necessary and sufficient conditions. So we want to know what's necessary for something to continue to exist across time. And we want to know what's sufficient for something to continue to exist across time. Perhaps in the best case scenario, what happens is we stack on the necessary conditions until we get enough of them to where we have the sufficient condition or sufficient conditions for persistence. Okay, so whatever's true about you and I, we continue to exist across time, and perhaps we can get at what we are in terms of our essence by thinking about what has to hold for us to continue to exist over time. What has to hold such that when we stack on those necessary conditions, we get enough, so we get sufficient conditions for continued existence over time. Okay, so that's big picture, like how many philosophers, including Olson, think about answering the "what are we" question. And as you can imagine, there's different views here. And so Olson, he deals with the view that we exist psychologically, we continue to exist as psychological beings, and that's what accounts for our persistence. So in the 97 piece, Olson calls this view the standard view. Sometimes this is called the psychological view. So call it the standard view or the psychological view. It won't matter. The big picture idea is that when we go from Jeremy, me, 10 minutes ago to Jeremy, me now, what is it that explains how I continue to exist over those 10 minutes, all the while remaining the same, in this case me, has something to do with sort of psychological facts. Perhaps it has to do with the fact that I have the same psychology, full stop. So I have, the same beliefs and desires and values, right? Or perhaps I have the same consciousness, the same self-consciousness. I mean, there's different ways of really unpacking this view, but at the end of the day, the psychological view is going to claim that when we look at persistence conditions, we understand them in terms of psychological features, the psychological features that I have. Okay, and some philosophers want to say that those who develop the psychological view, that the psychological conditions have to be robust, right? So they have to involve, say, my sophisticated reasoning abilities, my considered judgments and values regarding things in the world, and so some then might claim that really in order for me to persist, I've got to be a person. So they have a robust sense of what it means to be a person, and to be a person means that that there's like self-consciousness, there's reasoning abilities of a sophisticated sort, there's the ability to make decisions for which I could be responsible, at least to some degree, etc., etc., etc. So there's different ways in which the psychological view can get developed, where the psychological conditions are sort of less robust. Perhaps we wouldn't want to say in those cases we have personhood established because we have a robust sense of what it means to be a person. But for other views, they're going to demand that that in order for me and you to continue to exist across time, we have to have these robust psychological features. Okay, a way of understanding this psychological view just very generally would be to imagine, for example, the following thought experiment. Suppose we take me and we remove my cerebrum, that part of my brain that's associated with higher level thinking, and so now I'm a decerebrated body. So I still have my brainstem intact, my nervous system is still functioning, so I can breathe, I can take in nutrients, I can metabolize them, okay, and all the rest. So the organism would stay alive, but you take away the higher level thinking because you've removed the cerebrum from my brain. Obviously, this is a fanciful thought experiment, but suppose that were to happen, and then you take my cerebrum, and then you take another decerebrated body. For whatever reason, it doesn't have one. And supposing we had the technology in place, medical technology in place, we were able to put the cerebrum in that other body. On this view, my decerebrated body would no longer contain me. I'd, as it were, be gone from here, from this location, as it were, and I would continue to exist. I'm supposing such transplants, such surgeries are possible in this now cerebrated body that was once decerebrated. Okay, so this is sort of a fanciful thought experiment that is supposed to help us understand what the psychological view is committed to, at least insofar as we're thinking about the cerebrum as being that part of the brain that is related to consciousness, to even higher level consciousness. Okay, so that's supposed to capture that view. There's another view that's out there that Olson considers, and it's the view that we continue to exist in virtue of being the same biology, having the same biological organism, and these kinds of things. So if we were to take that transplant case that I just mentioned a moment ago, you're to decerebrate me. In that case, the organism is still functioning, right? There's breathing, there's eating, there's metabolizing the food and all the rest. In that kind of case, the biological view, not the psychological view, the biological view in this case would have it that I continue to exist, right? Because the organism is still alive. So the biological view is going to try to say that we, very generally, continue to exist over time in virtue of having the same biological organism. Okay, so they would claim that what explains, why it is that, or how it is that I continue to exist 10 minutes ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, to now, is going to be the fact that I've got one and the same organism. Okay, organisms are the kind of things that can undergo quite a bit of change. So now this sets up Olson. Okay, Olson's argument is, look, we were once fetuses. Fetuses are biological organisms, okay, and there are times at which, especially early on in development, right, which the fetus doesn't think, doesn't have psychology. So if I was once a fetus, especially at the early stages of development, right, then the psychological view has to be false. And I have to essentially be an organism. And the same thing is true for you. So now we see, right, why the question, was I ever a fetus, is central to Olson's view about what we are, right? When we answer the question, yes, we were once fetuses, when we say yes, we're committing ourselves to the biological view. Thanks for watching, everybody. That's Eric Olson's 1997 piece.